Well, ladies and gentlemen, my name's Glenn Carlson. You're listening to the Dent podcast. And if you have a business and you're even thinking about the idea of potentially raising capital, then this conversation is for you. I'm speaking to Julie Barber. She's the #1 best-selling author of Investor Ready, the startup's guide to getting investors to say yes. I could almost say no more. She's also a Dent coach. She advises to businesses around the world. She's a non-executive director of a number of startups, one that's just raised over £4 million for their first Series A. If there is anything to do with raising money, structuring your business, preparing to be able to raise money, Julie is the person to get inside her head. So I'll get out of the way and allow Julie to do what she does best. I mean, the best thing I think we could possibly do is to dig in for people that are listening that are going to be interested in how to raise capital, how to access more funds to be able to obviously grow their business. And importantly, even for people that are listening, because we've never sold Dent, but we're constantly looking to reverse engineer how to make Dent very saleable. And as a result of doing that, we always reverse engineer great innovations and strategies that end up creating more cash flow, even though we don't end up selling the thing. So the idea of certainly becoming investor ready from our perspective has been huge in driving value. And I'd love to get into everything that I suppose is in your head about that, because obviously this is your thing. But before we do that, I'd love to know kind of how all this came about, because I mean, you used to build websites, right? So this is quite a innovation.
A long time back. Yeah.
How does this come together?
Sure. So, I mean, I spent 17 years at KPMG, and some of the early parts of that included building websites, also training as a tax consultant, and then moving into knowledge management technology, and then ending up as head of knowledge management for the UK tax practice, and then head of global delivery for knowledge as well. And in KPMG, knowledge is basically what they sell. So it's a really far-reaching area. And I was actually just reflecting earlier this morning on what a good education ground it was, because you end up working with people all over the world. You end up deploying software, building software, creating new organizational change in the business, doing strategic planning, all kinds of things. So it was a huge learning ground for 17 years, which I was really fortunate to benefit from. And a big part of what I did there as well was around innovation. So when innovation first started to become a buzzword, and unfortunately I've been around that long, it was a thing that KPMG really dug into and wanted people to learn about and to embed in the business. And I was part of the early teams that helped with that. And that started exposure to startups who were then coming in to pitch to be part of the innovation activities to bring new technologies, that kind of thing. And right from the start, it was super apparent to me that a lot of those startups weren't actually ready to be in that room, that they had a golden opportunity to engage with a potential investor with hugely deep pockets. And yet they didn't really understand what that investor would care about. They hadn't put together their materials in a way that would inspire confidence. Because, you know, when you've got that kind of gargantuan beast of an organization looking at a tiny startup, it's very high risk for them to consider associating themselves with something that could really easily go wrong. So showing that investor how you can be a safe bet, how you can be a really good company to associate with, to invest in, is super important. And I got really frustrated that they weren't able to do this well. And then when I left there, I spent a year doing a big project for the financial services compensation scheme, and then after that set up Spark 4 years ago, and then consequently did some more innovation work for some banks like HSBC. Again, working with startups, getting more and more frustrated that they just didn't have the skills, and it's not even a reasonable expectation to ask founders to have those skills. They start a company because they know how to solve a particular problem. They've got a skill set around that problem, and that's what they know how to do. Fundraising isn't really in the skill set for the majority of founders. It's not something that they're used to. And then they're plunged into this world where they're expected to be highly competent. So as I set up Spark and moved into my own consultancy, that was one of the key areas that we focused on, was providing that help and support.
So we're going to get into, and I'm just reading it so I make sure I get it right, the subtitle. So Investor Ready, obviously your book, I think people can see it behind you there. Yeah. If you're watching the video of the podcast, the guide for startups on getting investors to say yes, right? So we're getting into that, but talking to another business owner, how do you kind of unpack your business model? Like, what does Spark do? How's it structured? Yes, definitely the value proposition, but also the business model. Like, if you're speaking to other KPIs or something along those lines, like how do you kind of help people get not just what you do, but how you do it?
We articulate what we do into 3 sections. So we work on strategy, fundraising, and governance as well. Because often startups aren't well shaped in what their strategic plans are, which then makes it hard to invest in them. So getting the strategic planning right in the first place is super important. The actual fundraising activities is a whole area of support. And then the third piece is, once they've got funding, investors then start asking awkward questions like, what kind of governance is there in this company to make sure that our money is being spent well? And again, lots of founders have never had to introduce governance of any kind, and they kind of look at you blankly and go, I don't know, what governance? So
God, we didn't even have a business plan until we realized we needed some money. Then we just made all this stuff up to see if we could get money. Now you're asking about governance. It's like, cool, blimey, Charlie.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really providing that flow that gets them all the way through to a point where they then ultimately become self-sustaining, or they get to a point where they're big enough to then bring in bigger and larger advisors as they get past Series A. So we really, work on helping the companies set up a really solid investable business on an ongoing basis. So it's not one investment round, it's get your strategy right, get the first round, get the governance right, which then leads you to the second round and the third round to create, bigger and bigger businesses. So
do you find that startups are, normally pretty hungry for what you do, or do they sort of not know that they've got a problem that needs solving?
You get a mix, really. So, I had a call with someone yesterday who was completely said, look, I know I'm brilliant at marketing. That's where I come from. Actually structuring and strategy and everything else, I haven't got a clue, and I really need help, which is great because, understanding their strengths and their weaknesses is super important. And then you get some people who kind of get in contact for a chat, but then they go, oh yeah, but I've got an amazing pitch deck and I've got an amazing business plan and I'm all set and I don't really need any help at all. But when you look at it, it's actually not that good. So some people take that kind of self-belief that entrepreneurs need to have, but they take it almost a bit too far, to the point where they're slightly deluded about from what they've actually got. Yeah.
From optimism to fantasy.
Yeah. Yes. Exactly.
Yeah, beautiful. And what do you find beyond that? What are some of the big mistakes that you find that they make? Like, in preparing for or not preparing for raising money. Like, what's the lay of the land in terms of kind of the big stumbling blocks that people make?
I think a lot of the stumbling blocks are around preparation. So there's a real culture around, oh, just chuck a pitch deck together and go out and start talking to investors. Well, that's great. But if that investor then says, oh, I'm really interested, I really like what you do, can I see your business plan? And they haven't got it, then suddenly it's a really stressful, mad scramble to put together the business plan that sits behind the promises of the pitch deck. Likewise, if they haven't got a proper financial model put together, how can an investor trust that you can deliver what you promised in the pitch deck if you don't understand what your costs are going to be? And even if you get past that point and they say, okay, I'm really interested, I'd like to do due diligence now. If you haven't got your data room set up properly with all the information in that they need, you're about to enter the most stressful period of your life where you're at risk of losing that investment that's nearly in your hand because you haven't got all the materials ready that will make that a smooth process. And you're then showing the investor that actually you're not well prepared, you're not very professional about the process that you're going through, which gives them doubts about whether they should proceed at all. So there are a lot of mistakes that can happen in that lack of preparation piece.
It's kind of like forgetting to put yourself in the customer's shoes, right? Like if on the flip side, a founder was going to be investing in something and to be like, well, show me a business plan and show me a deck and, show me this and show me that and the financials and the data room and all this sort of stuff and tell me about governance and how you're going to do this and what about that? And like, that's what you would expect if you're going to put money into something. But when you're on the receiving end and you're the founder, you're like, oh, I've got this great idea, this business, and we're going to scale and blue sky and global day one, and it's going to be fantastic. Forgetting what actually people want to buy or invest in.
Absolutely. And we call investors the other customer. So we really try to get people to think about them as a customer and to draw up effectively a customer journey for investors to go through so that the founders are really prepared that, okay, we're going to get in contact with them and then we're going to do this and then they're going to get this deck and then they're going to have a meeting where we'll do this pitch. And, they're really prepared for all the steps of that customer journey to make it successful.
So I have the experience, obviously, when we're working with our clients around building out like their ascending transaction model or layers of gifts and product for prospects, and maybe people go through a scorecard, etc., and they end up with this sort of beautifully structured architecture for attracting and onboarding new clients, right? And of course, those new clients have a remarkable experience, and it's always a bit of a wow moment. That's super cool. I'm seeing, obviously, you do the same thing, but in your words, where the investor is the other customer. What are some of the responses, given the spark, if you like, that got you into this in the first place, which is just seeing the frustration of, ill-prepared startups coming through KPMG, et cetera, to now where you get to present people that have followed your architecture and literally they can take the investors through this elegant conveyor belt, if you like. What are you seeing as the difference? Like, do you see a real shift?
Yeah, it's really building a level of trust in investors that if they know it's a startup that's been through our process, there's already a level of, okay, we know it's going to be set up right. We know that there's not going to be big gaping holes that we're going to find when we dig into it. So, for instance, had a conversation with an investor last week about one of my clients. We literally spent 15 minutes talking about them. Didn't even actually have to send him the deck to get him to the point where he was happy to go and have a conversation with the founder. He had one call with the founder off the back of that and where he pitched the deck to him as well. And he's going to go on and invest. Now, that's really shortened the time frame. It's really shortened the amount of relationship building that's needed, because he said, well, if you say it's okay, if you've been through it, your process, and they've done all that, then I'm pretty happy. So I think it's making a substantial difference.
So do you have investors or private equity actually send you in first as part of their process?
So funnily enough, we've just literally done a proposal for a private businessman in Europe who invests through his own family office, and he hasn't got the resources to do all of the pre-checking, and has come to us and said, is it something that you could do for me? So we've just done a proposal on that now. So that's something that we're moving into. Yeah.
New product innovation. So if if someone how would you sort of describe, I suppose, your ideal customer, in the sense that, someone that's looking at raising some capital, what's sort of the sweet spot that you play in? And then we'll dig into some stuff in your book. Sure.
So we work with startups who are anywhere from pre-seed to Series A. They have to be tech or tech-enabled businesses, and they need to be looking at a market opportunity of 100 million plus as well. So we're not looking at small markets, because it's very hard to convince investors to invest into small markets. So and then founder-wise, we look for founders with real experience of the problem that they're trying to solve. So either they've been on the receiving end of the problem and it's pissed them off enough that they've decided that they're going to fix it, or they've worked in that area for a number of years and they really know their stuff about that industry. The really risky ones are ones where someone's seen something from outside of an area and they've decided to go fix it, but they've never really been the person on the receiving end of that problem. They've never really worked in that industry. It's going to be very hard to get buy-in from investors for that kind of founder. So we tend to steer clear of those ones.
Yeah, steer clear of the opportunists. Talk to me about the book. The crux is obviously how to prepare your business so investors say yes, but talk to me a bit more about the book.
Sure. So, the reason for creating the book in the first place was because we've got such a structured approach to how we do it. We have, we call it the Investor Ready Roadmap, that takes people through this 6-step process. It was actually really easy to articulate it and to then be able to share it through a book in that way. So we take people through some pre-thinking before they get into the 6 steps. Should you even raise investment in the first place? Is it appropriate? That kind of thing. And then you get into the 6 steps of actually preparing to raise investment. And we've structured it really, again, from the investor's perspective of what are they looking for. So we look at vision for the company. Investors are going to use vision that you tell them about to then cross-check against other things that you give them or tell them. So if your vision says we're going to be in 5 different countries in 3 years' time, and they look at your financial model and go, no, you're not with that money, you're not, then it's a problem. So vision's actually really important and something that people can ignore if they're not careful. Then we look at the structure of the company and its back-end scalability. So if you create loads of front-end growth, can you actually scale the back end to cope with the front end that you're creating? And again, that's something that lots of founders can miss. They're so focused on the product and the growth and the getting customers, and they forget about, well, what happens if we sign up 10,000 tomorrow? Can we actually do anything, or are we going to be crippled? So that's a big piece. Then we move on to looking at markets. So markets are pretty big section because we look at the market opportunity in the first place, and have they really dissected that opportunity enough? Are they really clear about where their opportunity is? Sometimes you'll get people saying, for instance, our market opportunity is 3 billion in the house moving space, and you say, well, hang on, that's what is spent on house moving in total, but the bit that you're looking at is just this bit here, which is estate agent fees or something similar, and actually that's not 3 billion, that's 500 million or whatever. So it's being specific about market opportunity. It's looking at go-to-market strategy, and it's looking at protecting yourself in the market, so IP, protection as well. And then once we get past the market piece, then we get into the numbers. And we call it numbers and not financials deliberately, because it isn't just financials. We need to look at KPIs for the business as well. Not in the Dent fashion of KPI, but in the key performance indicators measures. So what KPIs do they need to be tracking to be able to show investors that they're achieving what they should be, all of those things, as well as the financial model, as well as how much they need to raise and what they're going to spend that money on as well. Because if you get the balance of your spending plans wrong, it can really affect credibility in front of investors too. So for instance, what we see a lot is people who say, right, we're going to raise £1 million and we're going to, so that's their first mistake, a square million, because no one ever needs a square million. It's, how much do you actually need?
People want a square million, but they need some other number.
They need like 845 or, something like that. And then second mistake is that they'll often say, oh, we're going to spend 700,000 on product development, and then the rest is split across legals, people, marketing, and investors are going, no, that's not how you make money. You spend as little as possible on the product and you get it out into the market and spend as much as possible on adoption, and then when you've got some revenue, then you refine the product. So if you're spending too much on product development too early, then you've got a problem. So we look at all of those numbers. Then we get into the investor step, which is really looking at what your fundraising strategy should be, which investors are actually right for your business, which investment routes, is crowdfunding right for you, or do you need private investment from angels or VCs or corporate VCs, for instance, all of those things. And then the last step is pitch. And that is where everything comes together, where you create your pitch deck, where you create your business plan out of everything that you've decided in the 5 previous steps, where you make sure that it all tallies up with your financial model that you've created, and you get a practiced verbal pitch as well, so that you can really confidently go out and say, we're ready to engage. And that's it.
Speaking of pitching, I mean, your book has just unanimous 5-star reviews on Amazon, so it's clearly rung a pretty powerful bell. What was the production of the book like from your perspective, your first book?
Yeah. It took pretty much a year to the day to finish it, to the point where I handed it over to the publishers. I had a very disciplined first 4 months of working on it. And then, unfortunately, my mum passed away. So I didn't touch it for about 4 or 5 months. Just couldn't pick it up during that time. And then picked it up again in about the November coming into December, and really went for it. I think that the challenge with that book was, because I interviewed so many startups and investors, actually just scheduling, carrying out all the interviews, getting them all transcribed, and then working out from these huge transcriptions which bits would actually go into the book. It is hugely time consuming. So pretty much December and January, I just disappeared from the world and worked all the hours to get it done. And used to frequently get my husband coming up to the office saying, "Are you finished yet? Because it's really late." And finally got it over the line. But it was a good experience putting it together. So yeah, it was enjoyable.
And what's it like now being an author?
I mean, it opens a lot of doors, and it's really useful for introducing our business to people as well. So when we get a lot of referrals from companies that we partner with throughout the startup ecosystem, and we'll get an email, for instance, that says, oh, introducing you to so-and-so who's looking at raising some capital, we think you should talk. Fine. Our first response is, it's really nice to meet you. Here's a copy of the book in PDF for you to have a read through and see if you like the way that we work, because this is how we work. Here's our scorecard for you to complete before we have a conversation, so that we know we can have a really fruitful conversation. Here's a video that explains who we work with and who we don't, so you can see whether you fall into that. And then once you've done all that, here's a link to our Calendly that you can book an actual meeting with us. So it's become a real part of that process that helps filter out people that we shouldn't work with, and helps really embed our expertise for people that we do want to work with.
It's just it's just obviously such a brilliant architecture, because it's front loading your model with the education, the knowledge for people to be able to make a really cool, clean decision without sort of burdening your time, I suppose. What's the ecosystem like at the moment with COVID and kind of all of the, in Australia, we're all still in lockdown. Well, half of us are. I think you guys are pretty much out of it now.
Yes,
but what's it been like over the last kind of couple of years from an investment perspective? Because I keep looking at the stock markets and it's like they only know one direction.
Yes, yeah. It's there's more money around for investment than there's ever been before, but it's going into certain places. So because of like in the early stages of COVID, lots of investors pulled back from any new investments, and they just funneled more money into their existing portfolio to make sure that they stayed standing, which is fair enough. And then even as we came out of that early, shore it up stage, there's still been a tendency to, from a risk perspective, not want to invest in very, very early kind of pre-seed. And by pre-seed, I mean no product yet, no revenue yet. So they're at idea stage, really. So for those companies, it's been a lot harder to get investment over the last 18 months. Anything that's seed upwards is finding it a bit easier to get investment. And those that do get investment are generally raising bigger rounds as well. Because interest rates in banks are terrible and have been for several years. So anyone with any cash sitting around is saying, well, I don't want to put it in a bank because it's I'm virtually paying them to have my money. I'd rather put it somewhere where it's got a chance of performing well. So that's why there's so much money flowing into the startup ecosystem at the moment. But it's breaking records every quarter at the moment for how much investment's going in.
Can you help me understand like the different types of investors, right? And so like, let's say I'm a business owner and I want to think about raising some capital. You've already mentioned a few of them. There's institutional investors, there's personal investors, there's family offices, there's, all these different, I guess, categories of places to go and try and find money, and all of them have their different strings attached. Could you, for the layperson, just unpack a little bit of a mental framework, I suppose, around the idea that there's just not one type of money out there?
Yeah, sure. So broadly, it falls into three, maybe four categories. So you've got grants, first of all, which there are lots of grants out there, but wading through which ones are appropriate for you and all the criteria that you have to fulfill can take a lot of time.
And that would be mostly government, right?
Government and also charitable trusts. So,
okay.
Often there'll be a family office or some kind of trust that was set up a long time ago behind particular grants around supporting, and they'll have very specific focuses. So they might be around, supporting women entrepreneurs or supporting people from a particular area of the country, that kind of thing. Not all grants are what I would call a true grant, because when you hear the word grant, you think, oh, I get money and that's it. Some of them actually do require that you pay it back. They just don't charge interest. So you have to be very careful about what the terms are of the grant that you're about to go into, and what other liabilities you take on, because sometimes there are things like, oh, you must come to these events, you must provide these reports, there's overhead that comes with it. So it's worth understanding what you're getting into. Second area is debt. Obviously, for some startups, debt is really hard to access because they don't have revenue yet or much history, but there are a lot of different types of debt out there. So there isn't just a bank loan from your standard bank. You can do things like invoicing debt, where you pre-sell invoices to an invoice debt company. They buy your invoices off you and give you kind of 80%, 90% of the value. And then when the client pays you, you repay the company that you've borrowed it from. So that can be a short-term fix. Something that's underused, but really helpful in this country, certainly. We get R&D tax credits, research and development tax credits. You can apply for those. So if you spent a certain amount or are going to spend a certain amount on R&D in the next year or 2 years, you can apply for these tax credits and the government gives you money. But that can take quite a long time to come through. So again, you can get debt against your tax credit claim. So again, that can be a really good bridge filler if you know that you've got 300 grand should be coming on a tax credit claim, then you can get finance against that and release maybe 270 of it early, but knowing that you're paying 30 grand of it as a fee for getting access to that money early. So debt can be a really useful tool, and certainly it means that you don't have to give away any equity in your company. So that's a big consideration for some founders who find it hard to let go of any of their shares. Debt can often be a more helpful route. The main issue with debt, though, is the gearing in terms of the amount that you could borrow against the size of your company. So if you need huge amounts of money to be first mover into a market or something, if you look at Uber, for instance, there's no way bank loans would ever have enabled them to create the speed of global domination that they've achieved. They had to do that through equity because they would never have been able to borrow that kind of money. So you've got grants and debt. Then you've got a type of crowdfunding, which is reward funding. So this is where you put up your project, your product, whatever it is, onto a crowdfunding site. You don't give away equity. People effectively donate money to you to help you achieve your project or get your product off the ground. And it's called reward based because typically you offer a level of different rewards that they can get depending upon how much money they put in. So it could be anything from a branded mug or a t-shirt to 50% off the product itself when it goes live, or even a version of the product itself, so effectively pre-selling the product. So lots of companies do that to help them through product development stage. It's not necessarily something that you would do later on when you're into market growth and all that kind of thing, but very early funding, that can be a really useful route. And then the final,
we've actually had about 5 or 6 of our clients like GoFundMe and those sorts of platforms, their books. Yeah. They put book, website, video series packages together, and they've gone out and pre-sold $15,000-$20,000 worth of pre-sales, or however it's structured, donations with the rewards, etc.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden they got 20 grand to spend on the production and the production of the book and the, I guess, the funnel surrounding it. And I just always thought that was brilliant.
Yeah. Yeah.
Obviously on a smaller scale to what you're talking about, but.
Well, it can be. I mean, people raise anything from 5,000 or 6,000 up to, 500,000 in those sorts of routes. So it's not always at the top end. It can be that you just need 20K to get some development done, for instance. Yeah. So yeah, And then the fourth route is full equity. And you can either do that through direct investment from some different types of investors that I'll go into in a minute, or you can do it through equity crowdfunding. So again, you're on a crowdfunding platform, but this time people who commit their money are going to get shares in your company as a result. So that's the equity crowdfunding. If you're doing direct equity investment, then you're either talking to people like angel investors who are typically entrepreneurs themselves. They may have had an exit themselves. They've sold their company and now they're using that money to invest back into the ecosystem. You might have family offices who are the organizations that look after the ultra rich and run their lives for them and invest their money for them as well. You might have venture capital trusts or funds who have institutional investment into their funds, which they then deploy into startups. And you might also have corporate venture capital, which is the big kind of Unilevers, Skies, etc., have venture arms of their business for investing in new innovations in their sectors to make sure that they basically stay on top of what's going on and have a clear route to acquisition.
And yeah, so I was going to say that their strategy there is they'll put in a little bit, see if it works, and if it works and it's going well, then they'll just acquire the whole thing and roll it up into the beast.
Very, very possibly, yeah. That's always potentially what they're looking for. Some have a wider remit, so like if you look at like Nationwide Building Society, they've actually taken a view that their investment thesis is actually to help the UK, and that they are a nationwide building society and they will support the nation in building new businesses that drive GDP and all of those kinds of things. So they're not necessarily looking to acquire. They're using it as part of their general thesis for the company as a whole.
I think you were going to talk about, was there another category?
Mm.
Did I cut you off there?
No. So I mean, the only thing that all of those investors that I've mentioned within equity are all investors that operate at early stages, so kind of up, so pre-seed, seed, Series A. So basically up to the point where product market fit is established, revenue is established. Some rare startups might even have some profit by that point. And then after that, then you move into private equity houses as well, which come in at the later stages and invest the much bigger sums. So they come in when you start talking sort of 20 million plus, then they start to get interested and they'll come in at a later stage.
Are you talking about a $20 million cap raise, or you're already doing like 20 million in valuation or in revenue or something along those lines?
No, 20 million cap raise. Yeah. So the amount you raise really dictates where you go, because each of those investors has their own investment thesis, which has min max limits on what they'll invest, who in, etc., and what stage.
But because I also want to dig into a bit of your entrepreneurial journey and how you've kind of built all this together. But I also just want to go, you mentioned that the first part of your book was very much about, the pre-work around, do you even need to raise money? And I kind of would have thought, to a large degree, that would be obvious. It's like, well, if we don't have the money to do what we need to do, et cetera, we clearly need to raise the money, et cetera. But there's obviously more to it than that. Can you just unpack some of the thinking and perhaps the folly around when people think they need either debt or capital or equity, or whatever it is, and they don't, and then they make the mistake of kind of getting into it. Now they're kind of stuck with it and they've lost that control potentially, et cetera, and what some of their alternatives might have been?
Sure. So there's a tendency with founders sometimes to think that they need a lot of money up front to get them going. We need 500,000, we need 1 million to get us started. And actually, to build perhaps a minimum viable product, an MVP of what they're creating, they might only need 20 or 30K. They don't need that kind of money. And the problem is, if you go out and raise $1 million when you're at that stage, when your valuation's very low, you're going to have to exchange a huge amount of equity to get that kind of money. So it's not the best thing to do. You really want to raise as little as you can until you're generating revenue, until you're starting to get market share, so that you can then raise money for growth, scaling against a higher valuation, so you don't have to give away so much equity in the first place. Now, obviously, if you're sitting there with not a penny in your pocket, yes, it can be, well, what else am I supposed to do? But that's where things like grants can come in. So, you don't have to go and raise equity. You can get in the UK, they do the startup loans, which are 25K from the government. And yes, you're personally liable for that 25K. But if you think you've got a real flyer, then it's not that much of a risk if you know that it's pretty much going to work. So really working out how you can bootstrap the business, how you can move it forward with as little as possible in the early stages, it helps you to retain equity, helps you to retain control, and also means that you're not spending time as a founder trying to raise investment, because it takes so much time and effort. It's a full-time job raising investment, particularly if you're a solo founder. If you haven't got a co-founder who, like if you've got two of you, one of you can focus on the business and one of you can focus on raising investment. If it's one of you, raising investment can take your eye completely off the ball of running the business. And then investors don't want to engage anyway because you've missed your numbers on the business. So you've got to really weigh up what is the right route for me at this point.
Yeah. And is that where you come in? Like if I'm a solo, I can kind of engage your team to kind of come in and essentially be my co-founder to help me build that out?
Yeah, exactly. So, we always offer two routes. So we offer more of a DIY route where people get our expert review and go through what they've already created and give them feedback on it and make sure that it's just tight before they go out to market. Or if they're saying, actually, I'm overwhelmed already running the business and I don't have the capacity to put together, the business plan and the pitch deck and what have you, then we'll do that for them in collaboration with them. We work with them through workshops and what have you, but the actual sitting down and writing the documents and everything we'll do to take it off their plate so that they can focus more on the business.
And do you just take a fee for that, or do you also take a slice of the pie if you think this thing's going somewhere?
So we've got a two-step model, really. So for the preparation work that we do, we charge a flat fee. So depending on the stage that the company's at and the level of help that they want. And then if we introduce them to an investor and that turns into a successful investment, then we charge them 2% of what they raise from that investor. But if they go off and make their own introductions and sort their own investments out, then we don't make any further money from it.
Cool. And so I guess now if I could, we should maybe shift gears a little, because in my experience, there's two types of business owners. There's the ones that, like yourself, see the value in leading from the front, and the authors, the speakers, the commentators, etc., and they really get their message out there as you have to front load the market, to manufacture demand, what have you. And I guess then you've got the ones that kind of get stuck behind the scenes and work on building it that way. You've obviously made the decision to kind of go the key person of influence way, as we would call it. Do you remember the point? Like, was there an inflection point where that was a decision, or did it just naturally evolve like that?
I think it naturally evolved that way because I knew that I had a very specific message to get out there, that the importance of being ready before you go and talk to investors, the importance of actually having a fundraising strategy, not just kind of rushing out there going, look, I've got a deck, come and give me some money. So I knew that message had to get out. And whether that's through, me speaking, me being on podcasts, writing the book, all of those things, they're all ways to get that message out there, and to get that point across. And I think that's part of a bigger thing that I'm gradually working on and building partnerships to work on is the fundraising system for startups is fundamentally broken. So there's no easy way to understand who is the right investor for you. There's no easy way to access those investors. There's no easy way to prepare all your materials. Everyone wants different types of materials. One investor will want this, another one will want that. And then you get a load of startups who don't really know what they're doing, a load of investors who are wading through millions of decks that they shouldn't ever see because they're not even appropriate for their thesis, or not even of the quality that they should see as well. And it's just the biggest mess you could possibly imagine. So gradually what I'm working on is chipping away at elements of that. So yes, let's get the startups organized so that they're actually tackling the right investors, not the wrong ones. So they're not wasting their time or the investors' time. Let's get them having the right materials in place so that they can move smoothly through a process, so they're not wasting their time or the investors' time. Then the next bit is being able to get access to those investors. So we're now working with some different organizations that have portals that show them exactly who's the right person to contact. So that takes some time out of the equation. So at every step of the process, we're trying to figure out how to take time and angst out of that process for both sides of the equation and create a really smooth process that means that startups can move faster and with more confidence, and investors can invest faster and with more confidence as well.
And you've raised, I think, tens and tens of millions of pounds for people that are going through your process and journey, and you bring an ecosystem of like service companies, suppliers, etc. Like, how do you, which is of course, well, it's creating product. Like you're creating a value proposition, but you're doing it through partnerships to a large, to a degree as well. Yeah. And I just love your thoughts on how you bring that together, because you're so strong when it comes to product.
Yeah. So I mean, the partnership side really coalesced into something solid about this time last year, because we'd been building relationships with so many different great companies that are all service companies to startups, whether they're accountants, lawyers, marketing people, developers, you name it. And it really got to the point where I was like, well, we know these people. We don't necessarily tell our clients that that's part of what they get access to. And also all these people that we know don't know each other either. So there's a missing piece there. So we set up the Spark ecosystem last year. So all 15 of those companies now belong to the Spark ecosystem. We meet up once a month, talk through challenges that we're facing, or clients that we might have that we sort of want some thoughts from the others on. And we're now spinning that out into a monthly public troubleshooting session, which startups will be able to sign up to and say, I've got a marketing challenge or whatever, and then the relevant members of the ecosystem will be on that live session to work through it with them for free, just as a kind of a giving back type thing. But then it also means that clients that sign up with us can say, oh, really need a good accountant. I really need someone to do our R&D tax credits claim. I really need the branding redone. And they know that there's already a trusted supplier that they can just go straight to. And sometimes we just refer them across, or if it's part of a bigger piece that needs doing, then sometimes we'll bundle those services in with what we're doing and we'll sort of charge it all through Spark, but it really depends on what the client needs.
Now, you're, of course, a celebrated dent coach, but you're also a coach for the Royal Academy of Engineering. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. Well, actually, that finished about a month ago, but I was a coach for them for a year in a global entrepreneurs program.
Right. Because I was going to say, Royal Academy of Engineering didn't sound entrepreneurial ecosystem-y, unless I misunderstand their name.
No. So that they have this whole program around startup and innovation, and it's a global one. So I was actually mentoring startup founders from Malaysia and Indonesia over the course of a year. I had two from Malaysia, one from Indonesia, and actually supporting them through. A couple of them were literally at ideation stage and how do I turn this into a product? And one was already up and running, but was now out there looking at raising capital and what have you. So doing that kind of remote mentoring. They actually came over to the UK just before COVID hit, like 3 weeks before. We managed to meet them all. And then back they went, and we did the whole rest of the mentoring remotely for a year. But it's been a great experience because learning about the different cultures around, startup behavior, and also two of them are senior lecturers at universities in Malaysia. So the ties that universities have over IP that you might create or businesses that you might start when you're working for them has a whole other set of challenges that you have to overcome as well. So it's been really interesting unpacking that with them and helping them move forward. But the one that was already up and running, she's raised 2 rounds since I started working with her. She's absolutely going great guns, and now is looking at international expansion out of Indonesia.
Brilliant.
So yeah, it's been really rewarding to work with them.
I was going to say, it must be pretty rewarding for you to work with these people and all of a sudden they've got the resources they need as a result of essentially your IP, your roadmaps and presto. It must be pretty cool. You must get invited to a lot of launch parties.
Yeah. Well, not in the last year, but but hopefully now things are opening up a bit more. Yeah.
Coaching smaller businesses. So of course you're as a coach in Dent working with businesses that aren't necessarily on a trajectory to 100 million. That's not typically the types of founders that we attract. It's more, how do I go from, $500,000 to 2 million and take that $500,000 in revenue and turn it into $500,000 in profit or something along those lines, slightly different, a different level of scale. Do you find some of the lessons that you've learned working with funded startups transfer and apply to the smaller growing business?
Definitely, because what we're always trying to do with the startups is set them up right from the beginning, so that they're properly structured to grow really well, that they're properly structured to take on investment or to do whatever they need to do. And the same really applies to the SME established business as well. If it's not set up right, if they haven't got the right processes, the right assets, the right partnerships, all of those things in place, they're not going to be able to achieve what they want to achieve in the future. And there's a big part of what I tend to talk about to people as well is being investor ready is just the same as being ready for anything. So if you've got, if you've got a good business plan, if you have a financial model that you work with on a regular basis, if you've got a pitch deck for your business, then if an opportunity comes up to partner with someone, to create a joint venture, to acquire another business, to be acquired, you're ready. And that means that you can take advantage of things that otherwise might seem completely out of reach. But if you've got those assets available and that thought process going on all the time, you're much more likely to take advantage of those things.
As someone that's gone through our KPI process and has just executed, at absolutely a world-class level, what's the common advice that you find you're giving to business owners that are going through the process of building out their brand, starting to lead from the front a little bit more, start building out some of these assets that make them more visible, that make them more well-known, that force them to, I guess, catalyze a message sometimes for the first time that's designed to sort of spread? What's it like? I suppose, what's it like working with people that are walking in your footsteps now? Now you've sort of been there, done that. And B, what are the common, I guess, traps or mistakes or problems that you find people are making?
Sure. I think the advice I would give is to keep the faith, because sometimes it feels like there is so much that needs to be done. And it's so hard to keep pace with everything that needs to be done that it's easy to go, I should just focus on running the business I've got. Why am I doing all this stuff? But the things that you do now will return dividends in 6 months, in 12 months, in 18 months. And you have to know that you're building up to a kind of crescendo of effort that you'll start to see the returns coming back from it. But what you do now might not have an effect today or tomorrow. So I think that keep the faith bit is really important. Having said that, I think pacing yourself is also really important, because if you try to do all of this stuff at once, you'll probably kill yourself in the process. And I know I nearly did a few times. I just was doing I was at one point when I was writing the book, I was also delivering on a 40-hour-a-week contract and looking after my mum, who was poorly at the time, and with a son and with a horse and with dogs, and your head's going to explode at some point. So you do need to pace yourself through the journey and work out what pace is right for you, but you do need to keep going. I think the one thing that I end up saying to people a lot is it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be done, which I know is one of Daniel's favorite sayings as well. It's better done than not. And I think people get stuck on, well, I just need to go round again and I just need to just perfect this thing before I put it out there. There's no point, because as soon as you've used that thing, whatever it is, for about 2 months, you will have learned from it and you're going to iterate it again anyway. So you may as well get it out there and start learning from it. And then, whatever it is, whether it's a brochure, whether it's a website, whether it's a product itself, all of those things, you'll constantly be revising them. So you may as well just get it out there and start learning.
I know you're also a big advocate for the UN Global Goals and business as a force for good. I'd love to kind of understand, where the seed of that was first planted, and B, kind of what it's grown into. What's your vision, creating a spark and building this ecosystem of funded businesses? Where did that all come from?
We support a couple of different UN global goals. One around kind of righting inequalities and that kind of thing, and then also one around helping women and children escaping domestic violence. I'm really lucky; I've never been in that position, but when I became a mum and became part of different parent communities, I suddenly realised what a big problem confidence is for women, and what a big problem domestic violence is, and how unseen it is. And when I was actually on maternity leave, I started up a small
startup then called Confident Mums, which ultimately I had to shut down and go and earn some proper money. But instead now what we do is donate 2% of all our revenue to a refuge that helps women and children locally to escape from violence and set up new lives for themselves. So that's really important to me that we do that, because I can see it's a bit of a there but for the grace of God go I. You can see how easy it is for people to end up in that situation and how hard it is to escape from it. So that's really important that we do that. And then on the side of reducing inequalities, part of what we do is mentoring, people from different backgrounds, different geographies that might not otherwise have access to help and support. But then also I'm on the board of Generation Success, which is a non-profit which helps young people from diverse backgrounds get into proper careers in the city, that kind of thing. So taking that approach of actively using my skills, not just donating money, but actively using my skills to help that company be better and stronger so that they can help more young people get better jobs, it is also a key part. And some of those young people are going on to start their own businesses and becoming startups as well. So there's a synergy there too. But I think it's important. Lots of bigger companies do donations, and donations are great, but I think if you can donate your skills in some way, it adds more than the value of the money. So that's what we try and do as well to support those goals is donate skills.
I love that. If you could, this is a double-barreled question. If through your kind of entrepreneur journey, let's go to the last sort of 4 years or so, if you could go back to a single point in time and whisper some advice into your own ear, right, past Julie, the double barrel is, at what point would you go back to and what would you say to yourself?
I would go back to right when I was in school, actually, and I would, because when I was in school, there was no hint of any kind of career that involved running your own business. Everything was about all the careers advice, all the teachers, everything was you do well at school and then you go and get a job. And I did the very typical, did my GCSEs, I did my A-levels, I went to university, and then I went to work for KPMG. And, in many respects, I wouldn't change that. It was a great learning ground. I couldn't have asked for a better place to work. But if I'd had encouragement at school that actually maybe I could start my own business from the start, I probably would have done it a lot earlier. And it's something now that I tell my son, who's 6, like when we're talking about what do I want to be when I grow up? And I'm going, well, you could get a job or you could start your own business as well. Don't forget that that's an option.
Yeah.
So
you have some good IP in your family for raising capital.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I would have gone back to then and just opened the vista of opportunities a bit wider as to what I could do.
Beautiful. I know we're going to have a whole bunch of kind of KPIs listening to this, and often people that are just starting the process. So there's a lot of that enthusiasm, but there's a lot of that, holy shit. I think starting KPI, when the best way I know how to describe it is where people sign up for like skydiving, right, for the first time, and they're like, oh yeah, this would be fun, let's go skydiving. Yeah, skydiving, cool. And then like you're in the plane and they close that little plastic door and you're taking off and it's like brah, and you're like, oh shit. what have I
done?
Yeah, what am I doing? And then the door opens and it's like, and I was just curious as to, is there anything that you'd kind of share by way of, I guess, summing us up and bringing us home, not that we're in a rush, but is there anything you would say to kind of people that are in that zone or that phase of the journey, given you've been there yourself?
I would say make the most of the support around you, because it can, when you start KPI, and this is super common, you can be sat in a room with 70 other people and 65 of you in that room will be sat there thinking, I shouldn't be here. These people are all amazing. I'm not the same as them. You are the same as them. Everyone has their own value, has their own capabilities. So you have to believe that you have a right to be in the room first. Second is use that support around you, because you've got an amazing bunch of people who are part of your cohort, who are part of the wider KPI network. You've got the blockbuster sessions you can sign up for. You've got your accountability group sessions. You've got your coaches that you have access to. All of that. Anytime you hit a moment of doubt, a moment of can I do it, a moment of how do I do it, use those resources. Ask people, use the Facebook group, everything, because it's all there to help you achieve or what you want to. But if you don't use that, then you've wasted an awful lot of money and made yourself feel worse in the process. Whereas if you grab onto it all, then you can make the absolute best of what you've got.
And if someone wants to have you as a speaker, or reach out for a podcast, or to get the book, or to start potentially working with you to be able to get them investor ready, how can they do that? What's the best way to connect with you?
Sure. So they can find me on LinkedIn as Julie A. Barber, or they can go to our company website, which is spark-consulting.co.uk, or my personal website, which is juliebarber.co.uk as well.
Beautiful. I just want to say thank you. It's been great to be able to have this chat finally, but B, I just love talking to people that have executed what they love and what they do so well. And every single thing you've done, from your website to the book to the scorecard to just the way that you've packaged that ecosystem, is just super world class. And it's just awesome to work with you, and even better to have finally had a proper chat with you.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's all from us today. All you got to do is be brave, have fun, and let's go make a dent in the universe. Thank you, Julie. You're awesome.
Thank you. Take care.